Investigative journalist Matt Taibbi has released what he calls the UK files, exposing Britain's Labour Party's expansive efforts to thwart groupthink, or what they deem disinformation. These internal documents that he dug through revealed the party has attempted to censor both the right and the left equally. They've set their sight on Glenn Greenwald, Michael Schellenberger, even my co-host, Brianna Joy Gray over here.
Not me. Right, that's right. What's more, part of the UK files out today reveals how Britain's Center for Countering Digital Hate is being implemented, plus a discussion among political operatives in the UK on how to use fake news to destroy opponents while hiding behind the guise as an operation dedicated to fighting fake news. Here to discuss this most recent expose is Matt Taibbi himself. Welcome back, Matt.
Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
Now, this is such an important topic. I think lots of folks are focused on misinformation as we're seeing these kind of anti-misinformation efforts ramp up in the wake of the conflict going on in Gaza. Tell us what's happening here.
So this comes from a cache of documents that have had kind of a long provenance. There was a whistleblower who a long while ago got hold of a lot of internal Labour Party documents, and they've kind of made the rounds. They've ended up in the hands of an investigative journalist named Paul Edward Holden, who did this report for us. And what they show is really the whole history of the Center for Countering Digital Hate, whose CEO is a guy named Imran Ahmed. And what's crucial, I think the key point that comes out in these early releases is that this group, its origins come from a faction of the Labour Party, and it was dreamed up while Ahmed was working for the Labour Party. So this idea that it's an independent operation, it really doesn't hold water. It's a Labour Party operation.
So these, according to the files, tell us more about who specifically was, or whose speech was imperiled by this, and what was the mechanism. You know, this group goes to goes to the social media companies and says you need to take down XYZ posts for that reason. Is that what we're looking at here?
So that's the end story of CCDH, right? Like the Center for Countering Digital Hate, they're all over the Twitter files, for instance. Like, they're the most aggressive, kind of relentless group that we thought was an NGO at first. It had the appearance of an outside, sort of quasi-private or privately funded organization, and they would aggressively go after groups like, for instance, the quote-unquote Disinformation Dozen. They would demand that companies like Twitter take all of these accounts down. They would be working very closely with mainstream news organizations like the Financial Times. We had one email from the FT to Twitter saying, if you're not going to let us, if you're not going to take down these accounts by the end of the day, could you please give us a steer on that? And they would pass on the list that the CCDH had given. But we thought, when we first looked at this at the Twitter files, that the CCDH was just an independent group. What these documents are going to end up showing, and we only showed the first part of them in this report, is that this began as a Labour Party operation, particularly one faction tied to a thing called Labour Together, and they started with a pair of episodes in around 2015 and 2017 involving one Tory politician and then one Corbynite group.
So can you give us a flavor of the kind of posts that they were trying to get taken down? Was there a particular subject matter that was focused on the way that we saw focus on, let's say, COVID posts or health news during the COVID era?
Well, CCDH has a very broad idea of what constitutes a bigoted or hateful post. In fact, the CEO Imran Ahmed actually did a post once where he described everyone from Modi to Donald Trump to Jeremy Corbyn to the alt-right to other populist movements around the world as sort of one political movement that was allied by hate. So they sort of see everybody who's not within the kind of narrow neoliberal framework as being threatening. We saw this in the Twitter files. They particularly were very aggressive about the vaccine topic, but they also went after other groups that they thought, propagated what they called hate on other things involving, for instance, racial relations. But sometimes that was just sort of a cover, I think, for a political disagreement, and that's what comes out in these documents.
You write that they use a lot of guilt by association narratives to attack the reputations of both conservative and leftist politicians. And it's interesting, Robbie, we were just talking about this yesterday with the New York Times hit piece, if you will, on Russell Brand, where a lot of the piece was, these are the kinds of people that he has in his show. Maybe I don't have a lot of critiques to make about Russell Brand's politics, but look, he's had Tucker Carlson on, he's had Jamie Dore on, he's had Glenn Greenwald on, et cetera. Is that the nature of some of the conversations that you've been seeing?
Yeah, I mean, the CCDH, Ahmed in the Financial Times, actually, one of the things that they did when they were criticizing Elon Musk was saying, well, he put out a statement saying, I support Russell Brand, and implying that that this was already problematic. Again, there's no pretense of let's wait to see whether this person's actually guilty or not. There's no process that has to play out. Once the accusation is leveled, the person is already toxic. And yes, they do a lot of this sort of guilt by association. Your show has these people on it, therefore there's a problem with that. I got in trouble with a group similar to this because I interviewed Max Blumenthal once and had people dogging me for being wrong on the Syria issue, even though I've never once written about Syria. So it's that kind of a thing. But in British politics, this group is very, very influential, and they have been apparently going back a long way, but their influence was not known until now.
Yeah, this strikes me as sort of an evolution in, what is it called, Oppo Research. Typically you have an activist group, or you have a political faction aligned with a candidate. Maybe that candidate's running against an incumbent, so they dig up dirt, and then they contact a reporter, and they share with them that information, and they try to get the reporter, the media, to write about or publicize whatever the Oppo Research shows. Now, that the group itself, without even going to the media in that way, although they do obviously use the media quite effectively, just brand themselves as experts on disinformation, can lobby the social media, the platform itself, and then if they don't get what they want, the media, swoops in to say, well, look, these experts are saying that these are harmful posts and harmful speech, and the social media company is not doing anything about it.
Yeah, they're really just formalizing, as you say, they're formalizing something that's gone on in politics forever, which is this Oppo relationship. And if you've ever covered campaigns, you kind of know how that works. There's usually a private research firm that digs up everything negative they can possibly find about the opposing candidate. That gets told to you in a way that's, you're not handed a folder full of the stuff, but, it's told to you over a bar in a conversation with somebody wearing a tie who's a legit source. But basically, it's research to political source to reporter, and then that all comes out. This just formalizes and make the process and makes it an instantaneous kind of internet based thing. But the problem is that all those relationships are concealed. So what we see, for instance, in episodes like Brickgate, which has a lot of similarities to the Bernie Bro phenomenon in the United States, where a group of supporters of Jeremy Corbyn were accused of throwing a brick through the window of another Labour politician who was not with Corbyn. Now, there was never any evidence that any of these people were involved with throwing a brick, but they just created the appearance of it and pushed this story very, very heavily. And no one really knew that they had any part in this story. It just looked like it was an organically reported story.
Go ahead.
I was just going to ask if we know anything about where this group gets its funding. Obviously, the Global Disinformation Index, which is a similar group that I think is also British in origin, did indirectly get some funding from the U.S. State Department, which I found particularly obnoxious given how blatantly they were engaged in censorship. Do we know anything about this group?
We do. There was the piece that came out in Racket yesterday was a companion to a Sunday Times expose that came out over the weekend that showed that this group was getting a significant amount of money. I think it was £700,000 from a British billionaire that they didn't. I think they didn't. The issue was they didn't declare all of it. But that was all private funding. We haven't found yet any instances of what you were talking about with GDI, where there's state funding that makes its way into these organizations. But crucially, at the beginning of all this, the key people involved were still working as labor staffers. So one way or another, there's some government money involved.
So I have to ask, Matt, is what I got for similar to the Bernie Bro phenomenon that was apparent in Brickgate that brought Corbyn down? Did I get Bernie Bro, Matt?
Maybe. I think that's very possible. I mean, look, the way these things work is, they're going after anybody. I think this has been a major misperception of this whole issue among people who are kind of the center leftist position. They think, oh, well, this is just going after people who are right-wing belligerents or anti-vaxxers or some other kind of socially unacceptable person. Really, that's not true. They're going after anybody who is politically outside, the very narrow mainstream, and that can include Jeremy Corbyn. It can include you. It can definitely include Bernie Sanders. But the consistent strategy with every single one of these groups is to label everybody a bigot, intolerant, or supportive of violence or of threatening behavior, and then just sort of go from there. Right? Yeah. Exactly. So you know how it works. Yeah. I mean, I think you've experienced it by now. So I think you see. But we'll see what else is in the documents. Maybe we don't have them that recent enough to have any bearing on your situation, but I wouldn't bet money against that. Let's put it that way.
All right, I'm looking forward to hearing more about this reporting from you, Matt Taibbi. Please do go check it out on Racket and at your Substack, right?
Yep, on Racket. Yep.
All right, okay. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks a lot.